The exact moment my husband's face lost all its color, he was standing in our backyard with a paper plate in one hand and my divorce packet in the other. The grill was smoking. Our neighbors had gone dead quiet. His pregnant mistress stood beside him in a pale pink sundress, one hand on her belly, while he stared at the last page like it had reached up and grabbed him by the throat. He looked at me and whispered, "Karen, what did you do?" And I remember I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said I protected myself, Daniel, since you clearly weren't going to. That came later. The beginning of it, the part that broke something open in me for good, started on a Tuesday afternoon in late May on our street in Dublin, Ohio. You know the kind of neighborhood I mean: brick colonials, clean driveways, hanging flower baskets on front porches, men in New Balance sneakers mowing lawns in straight lines like their lives depended on it, women waving from mailboxes and asking if you wanted the recipe for that lemon bundt cake they brought to church on Sunday. Quiet, predictable, safe, or at least it had always felt that way to me. Daniel and I had lived there 18 years. We bought the house when our daughter Emily was 11 and our son Ryan was 8. Back when Daniel still reached for my hand in the Home Depot parking lot. Back when we thought growing older together would look like backyard barbecues, grandkids on holidays, and maybe one of those little camper trailers once he finally slowed down enough to enjoy himself. By that Tuesday, Emily was living in Chicago and working in hospital administration, and Ryan was down in Atlanta selling software and talking too fast every time he called. Daniel was 52. I was 49, married 27 years, long enough to know the difference between a rough patch and rot. Still, I hadn't fully let myself see the rot. That afternoon, I was in my kitchen rinsing strawberries in the sink when I heard the grind of a diesel engine outside. I looked through the window over the faucet and saw a moving truck backing into the driveway of the empty house next door. I remember thinking, well, good, maybe someone decent. The place had been vacant for almost 6 months after old Mr. Kessler died and his sons sold it. It was a nice house, not huge, but solid. 2-story brick green shutters, white trim, a maple tree in the front yard that turned bright orange every October. I dried my hands on a dish towel and stood there a second watching 2 men in navy shirts start unloading lamps and boxes. Nothing about it felt important yet. At 5:30, I made myself a turkey sandwich and sat at the kitchen table with my iced tea going over some bookkeeping files on my laptop. I still handled part of the office work for Whitaker Custom Homes. Not as much as I used to, but enough to keep the accounts straight. Daniel had always said I was better with details than he was. That sentence would turn sour for me later. A little after 6, I heard Daniel's truck pull in. That was unusual. He was rarely home before 7. I looked up from the laptop when he came in through the mudroom. He smelled like sun and sawdust and that peppermint gum he chewed when he was trying to cover another smell. He tossed his keys in the ceramic bowl by the door and said too casually, "You home." I almost laughed. "No, I'm a hologram." He didn't smile. He loosened his collar and glanced toward the window facing next door. That was the first tiny click inside me, that look. Not fear, not exactly, more like anticipation. "You okay?" I asked. "Fine." He went to the refrigerator, opened it, stared for a second without taking anything, then shut it again. "Actually," he said, "I need you to come with me." "Come with you where?" He jerked his head toward next door. I set my glass down. "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I want you to meet somebody." The tone of his voice made my stomach tighten. I stood slowly. "Daniel, who?" He didn't answer right away. He just said, "Come on." There are moments in your life when your body understands something before your mind does. That was one of them. I followed him out the back door across our patio and through the gap in the hedge line that separated our yard from next door. The grass had just been cut. I could smell fresh clippings and gasoline from the mower somebody was using farther down the street. A sprinkler clicked in the Johnsons' yard. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. It felt like any other suburban summer evening. Then I saw her. She was standing on the back patio of the house next door, one hand resting on the railing, the other on the curve of her stomach. Young, early 30s maybe. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail, white sandals, pink dress stretched lightly across a baby bump that wasn't huge but obvious. She had the kind of pretty that comes from knowing exactly how to hold your face when people are looking at you. And she was looking at me like she was nervous, like she expected me to throw something. Daniel stopped beside me. "Karen," he said, "this is Lily Carter." I looked at her, then at him, then back at her. Nobody spoke for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. Then Lily gave me a small, tight smile and said, "Hi." I didn't return it. "Who is this?" Daniel exhaled like I was forcing him through some tiresome delay. "She's pregnant." The world didn't spin or blur the way people describe in movies. Mine got sharper, crueler. I noticed the chipped corner on the patio step, the gold chain around Lily's neck, a smear of barbecue sauce on Daniel's shirt cuff from lunch or some restaurant or somebody else's kitchen. I even noticed the sound of a plane overhead. I said very clearly, "Pregnant with whose child?" Daniel looked right at me. "With mine." I have replayed that moment 100 times, and what still amazes me is how calm his face was. Not ashamed, not sorry, calm. As if he were informing me the roof needed replacing. Lily dropped her eyes. Not out of guilt, I think, out of discomfort. There's a difference. I felt all the blood drain from my arms and legs, but I stayed standing. Then Daniel said the next thing. "I bought this house for her." I stared at him. He nodded toward the kitchen window behind us, toward our own house, as if geography itself explained everything. "It makes sense," he said. "I can be close by. It'll be easier." "Easier," I repeated. "For everybody." That almost made me laugh, the nerve of that word. I looked at Lily again. She still had her hand on her belly thumb, rubbing slowly over the fabric of her dress. I remember thinking, he has built an entire second life right beside mine, and he thinks I'm the one who needs to adjust. Daniel straightened his shoulders and went into what I can only call his business voice, the one he used on subcontractors when he was explaining how things were going to go. "Here's the situation," he said. "I don't want drama. We can handle this like adults." "Like adults," I said again. "Yes," he kept going. "You can stay in the marriage if you want. I'm not throwing you out. But Lily's going to need help, especially later on. Meals, some cleaning, maybe errands here and there. She shouldn't be stressed." For 1 second, I honestly thought I must have misheard him. "Excuse me." He frowned, impatient now. "You heard me." Lily finally spoke up very softly. "Daniel, maybe this isn't—" He cut her off without even looking at her. "It's fine." Then he looked back at me and said the sentence that burned itself into my brain. "She's pregnant with my child. Serve her or leave." Serve her. Like I was hired help. Like I was some middle-aged woman whose only remaining function was to make his mess more comfortable for him. The rage that moved through me then was so clean it almost steadied me. Not loud rage, not wild rage. Cold rage. I looked at Daniel, this man I had cooked for and covered for and worked beside for nearly 3 decades. The man whose books I had balanced, whose children I had raised, whose parents I had taken casseroles to when they got sick. And I saw, maybe for the first time without excuses around him, exactly who he was. Not confused. Not having a crisis. Arrogant. He really believed I was too beaten down by routine and history to do anything except absorb the humiliation. What he didn't know was that for nearly 3 months, numbers had been whispering to me from spreadsheets and account statements. Small things at first, missing transfers, vendor payments that didn't line up, withdrawals that made no sense. I hadn't confronted him because I was still hoping there was some explanation I hadn't seen yet. Standing there looking at his mistress on the patio of the house he had planted next to mine like a flag I knew. There was no innocent explanation coming. I didn't scream. I didn't call Lily names. I didn't ask the kind of questions women ask in movies while the soundtrack swells. I just turned and walked back through the yard. Behind me, Daniel said, "Karen, don't be childish." I kept walking. Inside the house, the air conditioning hit my skin and made me shiver. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I went straight to the drawer in the dining room sideboard where I had placed a manila folder the night before. I had put it there after meeting with Michael Torres, the attorney my friend Denise recommended. At the time, I still wasn't sure whether I was being paranoid. I just wanted to be prepared. Prepared. That word makes me smile now. I took the folder out and walked back to the patio door. Daniel had followed me halfway across the yard. Lily stayed where she was, one arm folded over herself now, suddenly less sure of the setup. I stepped outside and held the folder toward him. He looked down at it. "What's this?" "The divorce papers," I said. His eyebrows lifted. He had expected pleading, maybe tears, maybe bargaining. He had not expected paperwork. "You're serious?" I gave the folder a little shake. I already signed. For the first time that evening he looked unsettled. He took the packet from my hand and flipped the cover page back. "You had this ready?" "Yes." His eyes moved over the first few pages. Dissolution terms. Property division language. The formal dry wording that makes the end of a marriage look almost tidy on paper. He didn't read closely. Daniel never did. He skimmed, assumed, signed. He gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Wow." I said nothing. He looked up at me. "You think you're going to scare me with this?" "Number." His mouth tightened. "Fine. Maybe this is better. Maybe this keeps things cleaner." "Cleaner." There was that word again, too. He tapped the packet against his palm and said, "I'll look it over." I nodded. And because I wanted him to hear it, really hear it, I said, "Make sure you read every page, Daniel." He smirked. "I know how to read." I looked him right in the eye. "That remains to be seen." He frowned at that, but before he could answer, Mary Jenkins from across the street came walking by with her little terrier waving like she always did. "Well," she called brightly, "looks like the new neighbor's moving in." Daniel's whole posture changed in a blink. Friendly, relaxed, public. "Sure is," he called back. I stood there beside him, the evening sun warm on one side of my face, and understood that whatever came next, I was done protecting his image. Done helping him look like a decent man. Done carrying shame that belonged to him. I watched Mary keep walking her dog, tugging ahead on its leash, and I thought, you have no idea what just happened on this patio. But soon enough she would. Because Daniel had taken the papers. Because he thought the last page was just another page. And because he had not yet realized that I had stopped being the woman he could order around. When I walked back into my kitchen after handing Daniel those papers, I didn't collapse. I didn't throw dishes or call my sister or pour myself a giant glass of wine, even though every part of me wanted to do at least two of those things. I rinsed the strawberries I'd left in the sink. That's what shock looked like on me. Ordinary motions. My hands under cold water, the red fruit rolling against the steel basin, the faucet running too long. Outside I could hear Daniel talking in a low voice. Then his truck door slammed. A minute later, Lily's back door closed too. I stood there staring out at the maple tree between our yards and thought, so this is what my life is now. I wish I could tell you I felt brave right away. I didn't. I felt sick, humiliated. Old, if I'm being honest. Not old in years. Old in that specific way a woman feels when a man she built a life with decides she've become part of the furniture while some younger woman gets the fresh paint and the promises. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop still open to the bookkeeping files. A line of numbers blurred on the screen. I closed the lid and pressed my palms to my eyes until I saw little bursts of color. Then I got up and locked the back door. That night Daniel didn't come home until almost 10. I was in bed, but awake, lying on my side in the dark with the television off and the ceiling fan making that soft, ticking sound it had made for years. I heard him move through the kitchen. Heard the ice dispenser, heard a cabinet door open. Then his footsteps came down the hall. He stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment before switching on the lamp. I sat up against the headboard and looked at him. He had changed clothes, fresh polo, jeans, the peppermint gum again. His face was composed, but there was irritation underneath it, like I had complicated something he wanted simple. "We need to talk," he said. I almost laughed. That would have been useful around noon. He ignored that and sat in the chair by the dresser instead of on the bed. Distance. That told me a lot. "I know this wasn't ideal," he said. "Not ideal." He made a face. "You know what I mean?" "No, actually I don't." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke slowly like he was explaining math to a stubborn child. "This doesn't have to be ugly. Lily's in a delicate position. Stress is bad for the baby. I'm trying to keep things stable." I stared at him. Stable for who? For everyone. There is no everyone, Daniel. There's you, your mistress, and the wife you just told to cook and clean for her. His jaw tightened. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. He looked away for a second, then back at me. Karen, we've both known for a while this marriage hasn't been good. That line, men must learn it in a class somewhere. I said a bad marriage is not permission to steal from me and humiliate me in my own backyard. His eyes snapped to mine then, just for a second, but I saw it. Fear. Small but there. Don't start with that accounting stuff, he said. The room went very still. I kept my voice even. What accounting stuff? He stood up too fast. You've always done this. You get in your head, you make assumptions, you build a whole case out of nothing. I folded my hands in my lap so he wouldn't see how hard I wanted to point at him. Then it should be easy for you to explain. I'm not having a forensic audit in my bedroom at 10 o'clock at night. That's good, I said, because I already had one somewhere else. He froze. There it was again, that tiny change in his face. Then he recovered, gave a short laugh and said, "You're bluffing." Maybe part of me had been until that exact second. But hearing him say it hardened something in me. He picked up the divorce packet from the dresser. "I'll have somebody look at this." "Please do." He stared at me another second, then said, "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "I think I made one in 1997. I'm correcting it now." He left after that. Slept in the guest room. I heard the door shut and the mattress creak around midnight. I didn't sleep much myself. At around 1:30 in the morning, I got up padded barefoot to the kitchen and stood in front of the refrigerator with no idea why I'd gone there. The digital clock over the stove glowed 1:34. The house was silent except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing on Avery Road in the distance. On the wall by the breakfast nook hung our wedding picture. I had stopped really seeing it years ago. It had just become part of the room. But that night I looked at it for a long time. Me in satin sleeves and a veil that seemed enormous now. Daniel younger, leaner, smiling like he'd won the lottery. We got married in a Methodist church in Worthington on a warm June afternoon. My father cried. Daniel's mother wore peach and said I looked like a movie star, which was generous even then. I stood there in my nightgown at 49 years old, staring at the photograph of a woman who still believed that if she worked hard enough and loved steadily enough, her marriage would stay safe. I said out loud very softly, "What happened to you?" At first I meant Daniel. Then I realized I also meant myself. The next morning I called Michael Torres from my car in the Kroger parking lot because I didn't want Daniel hearing me from the house. Michael had one of those voices that made you feel steadier just by existing near it. Mid-50s maybe. Clean, careful diction. No drama. He practiced family law in Columbus and had already reviewed the first stack of records I brought him the week before. I told him what happened. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Karen." That simple sentence nearly broke me more than Daniel's cruelty had. I gripped the steering wheel and looked out at shopping carts rattling in the cart return. "He told me to serve her," I said, and hearing it out loud made it sound even uglier. Michael let out a slow breath. "All right, then we move faster." He asked if Daniel had signed anything yet. "No," he took the packet. "Good," he said. I almost smiled at that. Lawyers have a very different relationship with the word good than the rest of us. He told me to keep gathering records and not to confront Daniel further about the money until we had everything organized. "Let him underestimate you," he said. "People like your husband make mistakes when they think they're in control." That sentence stayed with me. Because Daniel had underestimated me for years. Not in loud ways, in quiet, daily ways. He'd say things like Karen handles the little details as if the little details weren't the reason his business ran. He'd joke at dinner parties that I was basically the unpaid CFO, and everybody would laugh, including me sometimes, because that's what wives do when they're trying not to make a room uncomfortable. Now all those little details were lined up on my dining room table in manila folders. Bank statements, vendor invoices, property records, loan transfers. And one discovery that hit me harder than the affair itself. 2 days after the patio scene, I found the withdrawal. I was at the house alone. Daniel had gone to a job site in Hilliard or so, he said. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows all morning, and I sat at the table with a yellow legal pad, my laptop, and a mug of coffee gone cold beside me. I was tracing a transfer through one of the company accounts when the source code on a linked withdrawal caught my eye. It shouldn't have been there. That account wasn't supposed to be touched. I clicked into the archived statement. And there it was. A large distribution from our retirement savings. Not just his. Ours. A second transfer came from the education account we had kept open for Ryan in case he ever wanted to go back for an MBA. We hadn't closed it because life is long and kids change their minds. Daniel knew that. He knew exactly what that money meant. My throat closed up so fast I had to stand. I pushed my chair back and walked to the sink, one hand over my mouth. The rain smelled metallic through the cracked window over the counter. Somewhere next door I could hear a hammer, probably one of the movers or a handyman assembling furniture for Lily's pretty new life. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had reached into the future we built for our family and pulled money out of it to furnish a lie. I stood there shaking, looking out at the wet backyard, and for the first time I stopped asking whether I was overreacting. I wasn't. If anything, I had been reacting too gently. That afternoon Daniel texted me. "Did you make dinner?" I stared at the message. A second one came in right after. "Lily's been nauseous. Soup would be good." I actually laughed. One sharp disbelieving sound in an empty kitchen. Then I took a screenshot, saved it, and forwarded it to Michael. After that, I drove to his office with another file box in my trunk. His office was in a red brick building near downtown Columbus, not fancy, just solid. When I got there, the receptionist offered me coffee from a little Keurig station, and I said no because my stomach was too tight for coffee. Michael spread the statements across his conference table and put on reading glasses. He didn't use legal buzzwords to impress me. That's one of the reasons I trusted him. He just tapped the retirement transfer and said, "He crossed a line here." Then he tapped the property documents for the house next door. "And this helps prove where the money went." I looked down at the papers. I kept wondering whether turning him in makes me vindictive. Michael sat back. "Karen, protecting yourself is not vindictive." I said nothing. He added gently, "If you stay quiet and this gets worse, you could end up answering for some of it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your name is on records and you handled books. Silence won't protect you." That landed. Because underneath the humiliation and anger that was the truth I had been trying not to touch. If Daniel's financial mess blew up, it could splash onto me too. I thought about Emily in Chicago calling every Sunday. Ryan in Atlanta still asking me which slow cooker chili recipe was Dad's favorite. I thought about what would happen if my children learned not only that their father betrayed me, but that I had helped hide it. "No," I said quietly, "I won't do that." Michael nodded once. Then he pulled a page from a folder I hadn't seen before and slid it toward me. "This," he said, "is what we add to the back." I looked down at it. Not dramatic, not flashy, just precise. A notice. A summary. A record of financial misconduct tied to the house purchase and the marital accounts. Clear enough to rattle a man like Daniel once he realized what he was holding. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Michael. And for the first time since that Tuesday, I felt something stronger than grief. I felt ready. I left Michael Torres's office that afternoon with a folder on the passenger seat and a strange calm settling into my chest. Not peace, not yet. But clarity. The sky over Columbus was that pale gray blue you get before a summer storm rolls in. Traffic moved slowly along Riverside Drive, and I remember sitting at a red light watching a couple in the next car argue about directions while a country song hummed faintly from their radio. Ordinary life. That's what struck me most. The world hadn't stopped because my marriage had cracked open. People were still buying groceries. Kids were still riding bikes down sidewalks. Someone somewhere was probably complaining about the price of gas. Meanwhile, I was holding documents that could dismantle the man I had built half my life around. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I felt tired. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else growing, something steady. For 27 years, I had been the person who made things smoother, quieter, easier for Daniel. If a contractor was angry, I smoothed it over. If the books were messy, I fixed them. If Daniel forgot an anniversary dinner reservation, I laughed it off and made spaghetti instead. I had always believed that being a good partner meant absorbing the rough edges. But driving home that day, I realized something. Daniel hadn't mistaken my kindness. He had mistaken it for weakness. And that mistake was about to cost him. When I pulled into the driveway, his truck wasn't there. Next door, though, there was activity. The garage door was open at Lily's house. A man in a Home Depot apron was carrying in a boxed crib, while Lily stood nearby talking on her phone, one hand resting on her stomach. She looked comfortable already, like she belonged there. For a moment I sat in the car and watched them. The scene might have looked sweet to someone driving past. A young pregnant woman preparing for a baby, a new house, a fresh start. Except the house had been paid for with money pulled out of our retirement account, and part of Ryan's education fund. The rage that rose in me then wasn't loud or chaotic. It was cold. I opened the car door, stepped out, and walked toward my front porch. Lily noticed me. She hesitated, then gave a small wave. "Hi," she called carefully. I didn't wave back, but I did stop. For a few seconds we just looked at each other across the line of shrubs dividing the yards. Up close she looked younger than I'd first thought. Maybe 29, 30 at most. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun now, and there was a faint shine of sweat along her hairline from the humid Ohio air. "You live next door," she said, as if we hadn't already established that. "Yes." She shifted her weight. Daniel said things were tense. I almost smiled at that word. "Tense," one repeated. She glanced toward the garage where the crib box was disappearing inside. "I didn't mean for things to happen this way," she said. There it was, the sentence mistresses always say. I leaned one shoulder against the porch railing and looked at her. "You're pregnant with a married man's child," I said calmly. Things were never going to happen in a tidy way. Her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, but then Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway. He climbed out, saw the two of us standing there, and immediately frowned. "What's going on?" "Your neighbor and I were talking," Lily said quickly. Daniel walked over, his eyes moving between us like he was trying to read the temperature of the moment. "You don't need to talk to her," he told Lily. The phrasing hit me like a slap. Not, "You don't need to argue." Not, "This isn't the time." "You don't need to talk to her." As if I were a nuisance, a leftover problem. I straightened. "I was just coming inside," I said. Daniel looked relieved at that, like he had successfully avoided something messy. That relief irritated me more than if he had yelled. I stepped past him and opened my front door. Before I went inside, I turned and said one more thing. "Daniel." He looked back. "Make sure you read every page." His mouth tightened. "Karen, stop with the drama." Then he turned away. That night I sat at my kitchen table again with the folder Michael had given me. The last page lay on top. Simple. Direct. Legal language, but clear enough that anyone with half a brain would understand the risk. I read it again. Then I slid it into the back of the divorce packet. The plan itself wasn't complicated. Michael had advised something very simple: patience. Let Daniel feel confident. Let him believe he still controlled the situation. People who think they've won, Michael had said, rarely read carefully. The next few days proved him right. Daniel started acting almost cheerful. Not affectionate, those days were clearly over, but relaxed in the way a man gets when he thinks a difficult conversation has been resolved. He moved most of his clothes to the guest room, but still came and went from the house freely. Sometimes I'd hear him outside helping Lily carry groceries or assembling baby furniture. Once late Thursday afternoon I saw them at the mailbox together. She laughed at something he said. His hand rested lightly on her back. I watched from behind the kitchen curtain for a moment before stepping away. I wasn't jealous. That stage had already burned out. What I felt instead was something cooler. Observation. Daniel also started talking about the future, like the divorce was already settled. Friday evening he walked into the kitchen while I was making tea and said, "I'm thinking of having a barbecue this weekend." I turned slowly. For what? To introduce Lily to the neighbors. I almost dropped the kettle. He said it so casually. Like this entire situation was just a lifestyle adjustment. "You want to throw a party," I said carefully, "to introduce the woman you got pregnant while married to me." He shrugged. "People will find out anyway. Better to control the narrative." I stared at him. There was a time when Daniel's confidence had impressed me. He had always been the guy who walked into a room like he already owned it. Now I saw something else. Arrogance. "You're unbelievable," I said. He smiled slightly. "You'll see, it'll be fine." "Will it?" "Sure, everyone likes a barbecue." He grabbed a bottle of beer from the fridge and leaned against the counter. "And honestly," he added, "it'll show people we're handling this like adults." The sentence hung there between us. I nodded slowly. "When is it?" "Saturday afternoon." "Perfect." because by Saturday afternoon everything would be ready. Michael had already filed preliminary documentation. The financial summary was finalized. All I had to do was wait. Saturday arrived warm and bright, the kind of Ohio summer day where the air smells like cut grass and charcoal smoke. By 2 o'clock, Daniel had the grill going in the backyard. I watched from the kitchen window as he flipped burgers and arranged folding chairs across the lawn. Lily sat under the shade of the maple tree with a glass of lemonade. Around 3 neighbors began drifting over. Mary Jenkins from across the street. John and Lisa Hammond from the corner house, a couple who had moved in last year whose names I still sometimes mixed up. People carried bowls of potato salad and 6-packs of beer. Everyone tried to behave normally. But curiosity buzzed under the surface. They all knew something unusual was happening. They just didn't know how unusual yet. Daniel worked the grill like a host at a company picnic. Burgers are almost ready. Grab a drink. Beautiful day, isn't it? Lily smiled politely at everyone. Some neighbors smiled back. Others looked uncomfortable. Around 4 o'clock, Daniel walked up onto the patio where I was standing. "You brought the papers?" he asked quietly. I held up the folder. "Yes." He nodded. Good. His confidence was almost impressive. Almost. Because in a few minutes when he reached the last page, that confidence was going to disappear. And when it did, it would happen in front of everyone. Daniel took the folder from my hand like it was just another piece of paperwork from the office. That was the thing about him. After years running a construction company, documents didn't intimidate him. Contracts, permits, supplier agreements, he signed things every day without a second thought. To him, papers meant business, not consequences. Behind him, the backyard buzzed with low conversation. Someone opened another bottle of beer. The grill popped and hissed as fat dripped onto the coals. A lawnmower hummed somewhere farther down the street. It was the kind of soft suburban soundtrack you stop noticing after a while. But right then I noticed everything. Mary Jenkins stood near the patio table holding a paper plate. John Hammond leaned against the fence talking quietly with his wife. A couple of kids from the next block chased each other through the grass. And Lily sat under the maple tree in a folding chair, one hand resting on her belly, watching Daniel with hopeful eyes. Daniel flipped open the folder. "You didn't get fancy with the lawyers, did you?" he said lightly. "No," I answered. He scanned the first page. Property division language, legal formatting, the same dry tone every divorce packet carries. He smirked. "Pretty straightforward. I thought you'd appreciate that." He turned the page. "You're keeping the house for now?" he asked. "That's what it says." He shrugged. "Fine with me." Another page turned. Around us the conversation continued, though quieter now. People were pretending not to watch, but they were watching. You could feel it in the air. Daniel flipped again. "Spousal support waived," he said. "Yes." "Well, that's generous of you." I didn't answer. He turned another page. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the smell of charcoal and grilled onions across the patio. Somewhere behind me someone laughed too loudly and then stopped when they realized nobody else joined in. Daniel reached the final sheet. For a moment he didn't react. His eyes moved across the page once. Then again. The smirk faded. His shoulders stiffened. "What is this?" he said. His voice had dropped lower. Not loud enough for everyone to hear, but sharp enough that the conversation around us began to thin out. I stepped closer so only he could see my face clearly. "Keep reading." His jaw tightened. "This isn't part of a divorce agreement." "No," I said quietly, "it isn't." He read the paragraph again, slower this time. The document was simple. A summary of financial transfers from joint marital accounts and retirement savings tied to the purchase of the neighboring property. Documentation showing that the money used for the house next door had been moved without my consent. And a notice stating that the information had already been provided to legal counsel and relevant financial authorities for review. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. Daniel's face went pale. "Karen," he whispered, "what the hell is this?" Now the yard was almost silent. Mary had stopped mid-bite with a forkful of potato salad halfway to her mouth. John Hammond shifted his weight against the fence. Someone quietly set down a beer bottle on the patio table. I spoke calmly. "It's a record." "Of what?" "Of the money you moved." His eyes snapped up to mine. "You can't prove anything." I don't need to prove it here. He looked down again, scanning the page faster now, searching for something he could dismiss. There must be a mistake, he muttered. Number. You're overreacting. I don't think so. His breathing had changed, shorter now. He turned slightly away from me and lowered his voice further. You're going to embarrass yourself with this. I almost smiled. Daniel still thought embarrassment was the worst possible outcome. He hadn't yet grasped that embarrassment was the least of his problems. Behind him, Lily had stood up from the chair. Daniel, she said softly. He ignored her. You actually sent this somewhere, he said to me. Yes. Where? My lawyer has it. His eyes flashed. You involved lawyers over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Then a little louder, so the silence around us carried my words further than I intended. You withdrew money from our retirement account, Daniel. Several heads turned fully now. Mary's hand covered her mouth. Daniel's voice jumped. Lower your voice. Why? This is private. You made it public when you bought a house next door for your pregnant girlfriend. That landed. A ripple moved through the small crowd. Lily stepped forward quickly. Daniel, what is she talking about? He spun toward her. Nothing. She's twisting things. I held up a hand slightly. I'm not twisting anything. The bank statements are very clear. Daniel's hands had started shaking now just slightly. You had no right digging through my accounts. Our accounts. They're company accounts. Not all of them. He stared at me. For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel Whitaker looked genuinely uncertain. Neighbors weren't pretending anymore. People had gone completely quiet. Even the kids had drifted to the edge of the yard, sensing something serious was happening. Lily looked between us, confused. Daniel, she said again, what is she talking about? He opened his mouth, then closed it. Because he didn't have a simple answer. I stepped back slightly, giving him room, letting the moment stretch. That was something Michael had told me too. Let him talk himself into the corner. Finally, Daniel said, Karen's upset. That's all this is. About the money. Yes. What money? The house, I said. Everyone heard that. I continued calmly. The house next door was paid for partly with money from our retirement account and the education fund we kept for Ryan. A stunned silence fell over the yard. John Hammond shook his head slowly. Mary whispered, Oh my goodness. Lily stared at Daniel. Is that true? He looked at her, then at me, then back at the paper in his hand. His voice cracked slightly. It's complicated. It's not complicated, I said. You're blowing this out of proportion. Number. He crumpled the edge of the last page slightly in his fist. You think you're going to ruin me over this? I think you already did that yourself. His eyes burned into mine. You could have talked to me privately. I tried. Before you told me to serve your mistress. That one traveled across the yard like a dropped glass. Lily stepped back. Mary's mouth fell open again. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking older than he had 20 minutes earlier. Karen, he said through his teeth, you're making a scene. I looked around slowly. Everyone was watching him now. Not me. Him. I didn't make the scene, I said. You did. He looked at the paper again. Then something shifted in his face. Not anger this time. Calculation. You don't want this going further, he said quietly. It won't help you either. That was the last move he had left. Threat. But Michael had prepared me for that too. It already went further, I said. He froze. What does that mean? It means the paperwork has already been filed. He stared at me like I had spoken another language. The last color drained from his face. Around us, the smell of burning meat drifted from the grill where the burgers had been forgotten. No one moved to flip them. No one said a word. Daniel slowly lowered the papers to his side. And for the first time since that afternoon on the patio when he told me to serve his mistress, Daniel Whitaker looked like a man who finally understood that he had lost control of the story. Daniel stood there in the middle of the yard, holding the papers loosely in his hand, while the smoke from the grill curled past his shoulder. No one spoke. You could hear the soft crackle of fat dripping onto the charcoal. Somewhere down the street, a screen door slammed. A cicada buzzed in the maple tree above Lily's head. But in our backyard, everything had gone still. Daniel looked at the last page again, like maybe the words would change if he stared long enough. They won't do anything with this, he said finally. The confidence in his voice was thinner now, forced. I didn't answer right away, I just watched him. After 27 years of marriage, you learn the rhythms of a person's face. You know the difference between anger and fear, between bluffing and genuine belief. This was bluffing. You might be right, I said quietly. His shoulders lifted slightly, like relief had just brushed past him. Then I added, but they'll definitely look. That relief vanished. Lily stepped closer to him, confusion written across her face. Daniel, she said, what is she talking about? He rubbed his forehead like he had a headache. Karen's exaggerating. I tilted my head slightly. Am I? He didn't answer. Behind him, John Hammond cleared his throat and shifted his weight. I saw Mary Jenkins slowly set her plate down on the patio table, the potato salad untouched now. Nobody wanted to leave. Nobody wanted to interrupt either. People were witnessing something that almost never happened in quiet neighborhoods like ours the moment a carefully managed life came apart in public. Daniel tried one more time. He lowered his voice and leaned toward me. You didn't have to do this here. I met his eyes. You brought her here. He flinched at that. You invited the neighbors. Another pause. The smell of burned burgers thickened in the air. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice tighter now. Daniel, did you take money from their retirement? He didn't answer right away. And that silence told her more than any words could. She stepped back like someone had pulled a rug out from under her feet. You said the house was paid for, she whispered. It is, he snapped. With whose money, she asked. That question floated out across the yard. Daniel's face twisted with frustration. Everyone calm down, he said loudly, trying to regain the tone of a host managing a rowdy party. This is being blown out of proportion. But no one moved toward the grill. No one laughed. The illusion had already shattered. I felt something inside my chest loosen then. Not joy exactly, something quieter. Release. For months I had carried the weight of suspicion and confusion alone. Now the truth wasn't just in my head or in a folder on a lawyer's desk. It was out in the open air. Daniel turned back to me. What do you want? He demanded. The question surprised me. Because for the first time since the affair came to light, he wasn't giving orders. He was asking. I want out, I said. You already have that. Yes. I nodded toward the packet still in his hand. And now I have protection too. He looked down again at the last page. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, running through bank records, transactions, all the places his shortcuts might lead if someone else started asking questions. He swallowed. You could withdraw this, he said. Number? I can fix it. With what money? That landed hard. For a moment he looked around the yard as if searching for support, but the neighbors avoided his eyes. John Hammond stared at the grass. Mary looked like she wished she were invisible. Daniel had spent years building a reputation on this street. Successful contractor, friendly guy, always willing to lend a ladder or recommend a roofer. Now every person standing there was quietly recalculating who he really was. The realization hit him too. His shoulders sagged slightly. Lily stepped farther away from him, arms wrapped around herself. You told me everything was settled, she said softly. Daniel didn't respond. Because nothing was settled anymore. The grill gave one last loud hiss as a burger blackened completely. Finally, John Hammond walked over and turned the gas knob off. The sudden silence felt enormous. I looked at Daniel one last time. I'm going inside, I said. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say another word. I walked across the yard, up the patio steps, and into the house that had been my home for almost 2 decades. When the door closed behind me, the quiet inside felt almost unreal after the tension outside. I stood there a moment with my hand still on the doorknob. Then I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for months. That evening the neighbors drifted away one by one. No music. No laughter. Just quiet goodbyes and the soft slam of car doors. Daniel never came inside. I saw him once through the kitchen window sitting alone in a lawn chair with the divorce packet in his hands. He looked smaller somehow. For the first time in years I slept through the night. Life didn't magically become easy after that. Divorce never works that way. The paperwork took months. Lawyers talked. Accountants reviewed statements. Daniel's business went through more scrutiny than he had ever expected. But the part that mattered most had already happened. The moment when the truth stopped being my burden alone. About 6 months later, I sold the house. It wasn't a sad decision. By then, Emily had flown in from Chicago and helped me sort through closets and boxes. Ryan came up from Atlanta one weekend and hauled furniture to a storage unit with the kind of quiet protectiveness sons develop when they realize their father has disappointed them. We didn't spend much time talking about Daniel. There wasn't much left to say. I bought a small townhouse in Grandview Heights. 2 bedrooms, a little patio, walking distance to a coffee shop that makes a cinnamon latte I probably shouldn't drink as often as I do. The first morning I woke up there, sunlight came through the kitchen window onto a completely empty counter. No spreadsheets. No dinner expectations. No tension. Just quiet. A few months after I moved, I ran into Lily once. It was at a grocery store in Upper Arlington. She had a stroller with her. The baby was asleep inside. For a second, we just stood there in the cereal aisle, both unsure what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I heard you moved." "Yes." She nodded slowly. The baby made a small noise in the stroller, and she instinctively reached down to adjust the blanket. "You were right," she said after a moment. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. She looked tired. Not miserable exactly. Just worn in a way young people sometimes get when life turns out more complicated than they expected. We wished each other well and went our separate ways. And that was it. No shouting. No grand speeches. Just 2 women who had learned something the hard way. These days my life is simple. Morning walks through the park. Phone calls with my kids. Coffee with a few friends who stuck by me through everything. Sometimes people ask if I regret exposing Daniel the way I did. I always give the same answer. Number. Because the truth is I didn't destroy his life. I simply stopped protecting the lies he built it on. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that quiet strength can be far more powerful than anger. Sometimes the most important moment isn't when you shout. It's when you calmly hand someone the last page and walk away. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on the quiet strength it takes to stand up for yourself. And if you know someone who might need that reminder, share this story with them.